We are now extremely excited to have an exposition on cosmology of consciousness in the vision talk of revered Professor PS Satsangi. Professor Prem Satsangi was born on 9th March 1937 at Varanasi, India. He obtained his BSc in Electrical Engineering from Banaras Hindu University in 1957, MS in Electrical Engineering from Michigan State University in 1961 under US-8 TCM scholarship, and PhD in Electrical Engineering from University of Waterloo in 1969 under Commonwealth Canadian Fellowship for his dissertation on a physical system theory modeling framework generalized for large-scale economic systems. He served as lecturer in Electrical Engineering at Banaras Hindu University from September 1957 to May 1963 and reader in University of Jodhpur from May 1963 to November 1964. Professor Satsangi served Indian Institute of Technology, Delhi for 28 years in various academic capacities such as Assistant Professor, Associate Professor, and Professor of Electrical Engineering, while also holding various important positions in administration such as Head of Department, Dean Undergraduate Studies, Dean Industrial R&D, and Managing Director of Foundation for Innovation and Technology Transfer. He had a formidable reputation as teacher, researcher, and leader in the institute. He worked as Honorary Director, Dalbagh Educational Institute from May 1993 to March 2002. His current position is Chairman, Advisory Committee on Education, Dalbagh Educational Institutions, a think tank constituted to suggest inter alia steps necessary for achieving highest levels of excellence in the institutions at all levels. DI Vision 2031 for next 2 decades of education at Dalbagh is being prepared in consultation with leading national and international academic and research institutes under his stewardship. Professor Satsangi's major contributions are in the field of applied systems engineering, including socio-economic systems such as transportation and energy systems. He was the founder president of System Society of India from 1981 to 84 and the first chief editor of its Journal of System Science and Engineering called Paritantra. He has published 90 research papers in refereed journals and has attended several national and international conferences. He has successfully guided 35 PhD scholars. He has been the recipient of several prestigious awards, including the National Systems Award, Lifetime Achievement Award conferred by IIT Roorkee, and Doyens of Systems Movement Award conferred by System Society of India. Recently, during its Golden Jubilee year in 2011, IIT Delhi bestowed the Distinguished Service Award on revered Professor Satsangi in recognition of his tremendous contributions. Professor Satsangi was acclaimed the spiritual leader, the 8th Sant Sadguru of Radhaswami Faith Dalbagh on 18th May 2003 through consensus in a special general body meeting attended by about 25,000 representatives of Radhaswami Faith, with the following estimated to be about 500,000. Professor Satsangi has also applied graph theoretic system modeling to quantum information systems. He is actively encouraging young researchers to make a foray into the interdisciplinary field of consciousness studies based on study of microtubules in the brain. All of us are eagerly waiting to hear revered Professor Satsangi's vision talk entitled Cosmology of Consciousness Towards Quantum Systems Theoretic Modeling, Spirit-Mind-Brain Interactions. Revered Professor Satsangi, please.
Radhaswami, my best greetings to all of you. Consciousness is intrinsic to the grand cosmos, both at macroscopic as well as microscopic levels. Man, a creation on planet Earth, happens to be a perfect microcosm or the macrocosm. Spirit, mind, brain, consciousness interactions are at the microscopic levels analogous to consciousness interactions between universal spirit, that is supreme being, universal mind, and universal matter, that is physical universe, at the macrocosmic levels. In the course of the presentations earlier this morning, you have already seen this diagram. I therefore do not need to spend much time on it, except to remark that this shows 3 grand divisions of both macrocosm, which is shown on the left, and microcosm, which is shown on the right, that is the human body and brain. The 3 macrocosmic divisions ranging from the bottom upwards, are the physical universe, the region of universal mind, and the region of universal spirit, that is purely spiritual region. At the top, we have the Supreme Being or God, who is the reservoir of all spirit forces and therefore spirituality in the whole grand cosmos. Similarly, in the human, we have 6 levels, each in the 3 major subdivisions, the lowest one being in the body and representing 6 levels of consciousness, the middle one being in the gray matter of the brain and having communion with the universal mind, and the highest one being in the white matter of the brain and having communion with the purely spiritual region of the grand cosmos. While any living being, ordinarily by exploring the outer world, as in the science, can only access the physical universe, the lowest grand division of the cosmos, it is possible for a living person, by taking recourse to meditation, to access the other 2 grand divisions, namely region of universal mind and region of universal spirit. As I present other projections, perhaps I would have more to say on this aspect. This is showing a system graph corresponding to the schematic shown earlier. This shows the range of systems for which graph theoretic modeling has been applied, and it's based on identifying a pair of fundamental across and through variables, which in the case of electrical system are voltage and current, which in the case of quantum information system would be quantum across variables corresponding to orthonormal unit basis vectors such as ket0 and ket1, while the quantum through variables would correspond to John von Neumann entropy with the associated probability amplitudes in the 2 directions pointed out by the unit basis vectors, namely ket0 and ket1. In the spiritual systems, these are spiritual potential difference and spiritual force currents. Physical system theory has its own fundamental axiom and postulates which are well known. Similarly, in propounding the spiritual system theory framework, we have laid down a fundamental axiom of spiritual consciousness. The fundamental axiom of macrocosmic or microcosmic spiritual consciousness is that the origin of the macrocosm is an infinite spiritual energy or consciousness source known as the supreme creator or being or super positive pole, accompanied by the omni-quantum spiritual force field of consciousness, ranging from the superpositive pole of full spirituality to the nether or negative pole of depleted spirituality. And each constituent fundamental element of this omni-quantum spiritual force field, known as the spirit force of consciousness, which may also be called a monopole, is the one which possesses prime energy or consciousness, and that all other forces, mental or physical, of creation or nature have been evolved by the association of this spirit force with media, mental or physical, of different kinds. This gives rise to the quantum mind force field, which spans the region of the universal mind and the physical universe on one hand, while the quantum physical force fields, electromagnetic, weak, nuclear, strong nuclear, and gravitational, span the third grand division, namely the physical universe or the macrocosm. The macrocosm-microcosm consciousness interaction postulate which says that man happens to be a perfect microcosm of the macrocosm in the sense that man possesses not only 6 ganglia for interaction with the macrocosm by making communion with the corresponding 6 subdivisions in the macrocosmic division of the physical material region, but also 6 nerve centers in the gray matter of the brain for accessing the corresponding 6 subdivisions or the macrocosmic division or region of universal mind, as well as 6 other apertures in the white matter of the brain for communicating with the corresponding 6 subdivisions or the macrocosmic division of universal spirit or purely spiritual regions. Similarly, there is another postulate called universal consciousness realization postulate. The religion of saints prescribes a systemic methodology of the meditational practice of Surat Shabd Yog for uniting the spirit force of a human being with the characteristic spiritual sound currents which emanate from the various spirit centers, 6 in the purely spiritual region, 6 in the region of universal mind, and 6 in the material or physical universe. And the spirituality obviously ranges from the lowest corresponding to the nether pole, which is approximately what one might call hell, of the macrocosmic division of physical or material region, through the macrocosmic division of the universal mind to the highest division of purely spiritual region, with the apex corresponding to the supreme creator or being, who is the reservoir of all spirituality in the grand cosmos. Consciousness implies awareness, subjective experience of internal and external phenomenal worlds. Consciousness is central also to understanding, meaning, and volitional choice with the experience of free will. Quoted from Penrose and Hamroff, 2011. While the science of consciousness in ancient India, as given in Vedas and Upanishads, dates back to 2nd millennia BC, it is over the past 50 to 75 years or so, there has been considerable interest in the modern science in the West in terms of cognitive psychology and neuroscience in the fields of neurophysiology and neuromedicine in studying the consciousness. The most radical departure from classical physics instituted by the founders of quantum mechanics was the introduction of human consciousness into the dynamical and computational machinery. Henry Stapp, 2006. However, the quantum generalization of the classical mechanical laws proposed by Heisenberg and his colleagues, notably Niels Bohr et al., who propounded Copenhagen interpretation of quantum theory, do not generate by themselves a dynamically complete deterministic physical theory free from any causal gap. Some of the important aspects of von Neumann's Stapp formulation I'll bring to your notice. It provides the foundations of a pragmatic neuropsychodynamics that is built on contemporary physical theory rather than an inadequate classical theory, taken from the Cambridge Handbook of Consciousness, 2007. John von Neumann converted Copenhagen quantum theory in a series of steps into a form in which the entire physical universe, including the brain of each agent, is represented in one basic quantum state, which is called the state of the physical universe. The dynamics then can be interpreted in terms of three processes. Process one is the so-called Heisenberg choice on the part of the experimenter about how to act. At the pragmatic level, it's a free choice because it's controlled in practice by the conscious intentions of the experimenter or participant. Each intentional action involves an effort to produce a conceived experimental feedback, which, if it occurs, will be an experiential confirmation of the success of that effort. Within the von Neumann framework, our conscious choices fix the orientations or the basis vectors. These choices can strongly influence our actions. Process 2 is the causation via quantum analog of the equations of motion of classical physics, notably Schrödinger equation, such that the resulting equations of motion are local and also deterministic as in classical physics. Process 3 is the so-called Dirac chance choice on the part of nature, and it can be regarded as nature's answer to the question posed by process 1. Each process 3 reply must be preceded by a process 1 question. This is because process 2 generates a continuous infinity of possible questions that cannot all be answered consistently within the mathematical framework provided by quantum theory. A rapid sequence of pairs of questions and answers, process 1, process 3 events, can, by virtue of the quantum laws themselves, that is process 2, hold a particular pattern of neurological activity in place against the physical forces that would tend quickly to disrupt it. If the pattern of neurological activity were to be a template for action, that is, an executive pattern of neurological activity that tends to produce a specific action, then the prolongation of the activation of this executive pattern of brain activity can tend to cause the intended bodily action to occur. This is well known in terms of psychokinesis. In accordance with William James's ideomotor theory of action, it has been extensively studied by quantum physicists, both empirically and theoretically, under the title Quantum Zeno Effect, STEP 2007. This tripartite quantum dynamics involving choice, process 1, causation, process 2, and chance, process 3, and the implementation of will via the conscious control of the rapidity of process 1 events provides the mathematical and logical foundation of a pragmatic quantum approach to neuropsychology. I bring to your attention some aspects as support from psychology. This is especially with reference to study of mind consciousness in respect of will and attention, either passively attend or actively attend, that is, reappraise and reinterpret. William James writes, volitional effort, that is will, is effort of attention. Everywhere then, the function of effort is the same. To keep affirming and adapting the thought, which, if left to itself, would slip away. Harold Pashler describes the key concepts of attention, a processing capacity, and effort, which is linked to incentive and to reports by subjects of trying harder. Pashler separates perceptual processing for categorical identification of stimuli from post-perceptual processing covering the tasks of producing motor action and cognitive action. There is an active mode of process 1 associated with Pashler's identification as post-perceptual processing. Such an active mode of process 1 action could, within the quantum framework, induce a rapid sequence of similar actions, that is, a repetition of process 1 question over and over again, that would activate a quantum Zeno effect, which would tend to produce the intended action. That is a template for action. All of these empirical actions noted by Pashler are in line with the general principle that effort increases the rate of conscious events, each of which inputs a mental intention, and that this resource can be divided between tasks. Applying the quantum approach to an experiment in neuropsychology of Kevin Oxner et al., in essence, consists first of a training phase in which the subject is taught how to distinguish and respond differently to two alternative instructions given while viewing emotionally disturbing visual images of violence or sex. One instruction, attend, means passively be aware of, but not try to alter any feelings elicited by the stimulus, whereas reappraise means actively reinterpret the content so that it no longer elicits a negative response. The subject then performs these mental actions during brain imaging of MRI. The visual stimuli, when passively attended to, activate limbic, that is emotional brain areas, and when actively reappraised, activate prefrontal cerebral regions. Perhaps the most ambitious attempt to create a quantum theory of consciousness is the one of Roger Penrose and Stuart Hamroff of 2011. It has three parts: the Gödel part, the gravity part, and the microtubule part. The Gödel part is an effort to use the famous Gödel's incompleteness theorem to prove that human beings have intellectual powers of non-computable or non-algorithmic thought and understanding that they could not have if they functioned in accordance with the principles of classical physical theory. Proving this would reaffirm a conclusion of the von Neumann formulation of quantum theory, namely that a conscious human being can behave in ways that a classical mechanical model cannot. The gravity part addresses the key question pertaining to quantum dynamics. Exactly when do these sudden quantum jumps occur? The Dicey-Penrose expectation is that objective reduction occurs when the overall separation, the product of the temporal separation T with the spatial separation S, reaches a critical amount given by the Planck-Dirac constant h cross equal to Planck constant h divided by 2 pi, such that the quantity S is given by S approximately equal to E sub g, the gravitational self-energy of the difference between the mass distributions of the two superposed states, and T is equal to tau, the lifetime, equal to h cross by E sub g. Penrose-Hameroff theory proposes that this time interval is the duration of time for which nature will endure this bifurcation of a space-time structure into the two incompatible parts before jumping to one or the other of these two forms. Before this conjectured rule is based on two very general features of nature, Planck's universal constant of action and Newton-Einstein universal law of gravitation. It invokes quantum gravity, attempting to combine quantum theory with Einstein's theory of gravity or general relativity. In a way, Penrose-Hameroff formulation or the von Neumann staff formulation seem to be complementary to each other, but they both put across the same view that it's consciousness which is a decisive factor in controlling any experimentation in the real world. Moreover, according to orchestrated objective reduction or COAR theory, this is accompanied by an element of proto-consciousness, as we have heard from the experts in the field. The best known temporal correlate for consciousness is gamma synchrony, 30 to 90 Hertz, often referred to as coherent 40 Hertz, representing a succession of 40 or so conscious moments per second, with tau equal to 25 milliseconds each. In human brain, cognition and consciousness are at any one time thought to involve tens of thousands of neurons, which may be widely distributed throughout the brain. At 80 Hertz or higher frequency associated with Tibetan or other meditators, expanded awareness states of consciousness might be expected with more neuronal brain involvement. Does this Penrose-Hameroff rule have any empirical support? An affirmative answer can be provided by the microtubule part of Penrose-Hameroff theory by linking Dicey-Penrose objective reduction rule to Hameroff's belief that consciousness is closely linked to the microtubular structure of the neuron. Topological quantum computing in OR-CoR is shown in figure 1, taken from Penrose and Hameroff paper and already discussed by Professor Satsangi in terms of A symmetry and B symmetry. Here, I would like to briefly refer to the braid group B sub n, which is a non-abelian group which can be presented as a set of generators that obey particular defining relations. Let sigma 1 denote a counterclockwise exchange of particles that initially occupy positions 1 and 2, and let sigma 2 denote a counterclockwise exchange of the particles that initially occupy positions 2 and 3, and so on. Any braid of strands can then be constructed as a succession of exchanges of neighboring particles or strands, which are the whirl lines for these particles. Hence, sigma 1, sigma 2, sigma n minus 1 are the group generators. One can invoke Yang-Baxter relation, which is given in the equation at the top, and in particular verify this in terms of figure 2 at the bottom, that sigma 1, sigma 2, sigma 1 is equivalent to sigma 2, sigma 1, sigma 2 topologically. An OR qubit based on topological quantum computing is specific to microtubule polymer geometry was suggested by Hamroff et al. In 2002. Conductances along particular microtubule lattice geometry, as referred to by the learned speaker who gave the inaugural talk. For example, Fibonacci helical pathways were proposed to function as topological qubits. Bandyopadhyay 2011 has preliminary evidence for ballistic conductance along different discrete helical pathways in single microtubules. Graph theoretic quantum system modeling has many proponents, and this has been practiced widely at Michigan State University and later at University of Waterloo, and continues to be practiced here in DEI, and has been applied recently to modeling of quantum systems. Quantum information and von Neumann entropy concept as brought out. Single qubit is represented by equation 1 and figure with the quantum terminal graph representation, to which I made a reference while showing the table for across and through variables for various kinds of systems. This shows the superposition of two independent qubits in terms of the corresponding quantum terminal graphs, which are expressed in terms of ket psi as being equal to ket psi 1, product ket psi 2, the product being the tensor product, and written in short notation by way of equation 2. Dirac notation, I believe. This is the disaggregate form of the quantum terminal graph for representing double qubit, and its aggregate form, which is simpler, is at the bottom. It also deals with quantum entangled Bell states and has an example of teleportation to which it has been applied in the paper which is due for publication in the International Journal of General Systems, where we take this view of representing this as a quantum circuit made up of functional blocks like C0, Hadamard, measurement block, then the classical telecommunication block, and finally the spin matrices which make corrections And so all these details are available in the paper which is given at the end as reference. One aspect to which I draw attention is how two blocks which are cascaded are combined graph theoretically. And this is depicted in figure 8. These are subject to quantum system graph vertex equations and circuit equations as given at the bottom. Now I come to the work of our distinguished visitor here and quote from it. Professor Elizabeth Berman and her colleagues, who in 2006 gave a quantum representation of Hopfield neural networks. Why I bring it up is that just now I gave you an example of quantum modeling for a physical system. So the next system to take up would still be physical, but rather subtle physical system of brain in the form of Hopfield neural network. And why I bring it up here is that we cast it later into graph theoretic mold, and this has done some promise of yielding certain further insights which are otherwise difficult to gain. So these are the equations reproduced from Professor Berman's work and refer to the Pauli matrices sigma x and sigma z and compute the Hamiltonian corresponding to each qubit, taking the tubular dimer as a qubit itself, and then summing it up over all the qubits and getting the Hamiltonian energy function for the whole brain or whole brain subsystem. So this is how the qubit is represented, as done earlier also. This is to capture the interactions as represented by the two parts of the equation, which I didn't refer to. One part represents the flipping of the qubit from one state to the other through tunneling, and the other part represents the energy difference between the positive state and negative state as represented by the measurement carried out through Pauli spin operator sigma z. So this is just to capture the relationship within a qubit. There is a discretization in inverse temperature or imaginary time from 0 to beta, and here is at a level of 4 discretizations, I equal to 1 to I equal to 4, small I. And these are the 3 qubits for illustration's sake. The interaction within a qubit between its state at 2 different imaginary times, 2 discrete imaginary instants of time, is through the zeta parameter and the sigma x Pauli spin matrix. The other kind of interaction is the one between each pair of qubits, and that is at equal imaginary time instants, and that is represented by alpha parameter. as drawn by the various arrows, and this is a two-way interaction. So this is the simplest equation which Professor Elizabeth Berman takes in her paper, and we use it to represent by formulating two basic functional blocks. One is the tunneling energy function generator. Here it has two ports corresponding to the two imaginary time instants, and the output port is a scalar port. These are the quantum ports, the other two ports corresponding to the two imaginary time instants on the same qubit, tunneling from one time instant to the other and changing state, is then provided through this artifact, and one can then come up with a micro energy function or micro Lyapunov function, which is given here. The advantage of providing this is that you can get it for the whole qubit by combining the subassemblies. You can combine this for all the time instants, and for each qubit, then you get a diagrammatic representation both in terms of the graph as well as in terms of equations, using the circuit laws for combining these in cascade. The output port is combined in parallel. The input ports are cascaded with each other, one after the other, and the output ports are all in parallel. So the energy scalar gets added up. The power scalar, energy scalar will all get added up. Similarly, for capturing the bidirectional Coulombic energy function as a generator, we have another functional block, and this also has two ports. Here the two ports correspond to the two qubits between which the interaction takes place at the same imaginary time, discretization. And the output port, as before, is a unit scalar port having a scalar potential difference of 1. And again, we are in a position to combine the various pairs of qubits for each imaginary time discretization. So here the combination aggregation is of a different kind. So you can combine all these and get the corresponding energy function. So this was to give an illustration of the quantum model of brain as borrowed from the work of Professor Elizabeth Berman. Now, I borrow something from the work of another author for bringing to your attention quantum theoretic model of mind. Von Neumann's formulation of quantum theory fixes the essential quantum link between consciousness and neuroscience through processes 1, 2, and 3 of von Neumann's TAP approach. Mind and matter, that is brain, become dynamically linked in a way that is causally tied to the agent's free choice of how he or she will act. Thus, a causal dynamical connection is established between a person's conscious choices of how to act, that person's consciously experienced increments in knowledge, and the physical actualizations of the neural correlates in the brain of the experienced increments in knowledge. Brettner and Hochschneider in 2009 report the application of quantum theoretic model to C.G. Jung's theory of personality, already referred to in a couple of papers earlier in the day, in psychodynamic field using a four-dimensional Hilbert space for the representation of two qubits. In a nutshell, the two-qubit model follows Jung in considering four psychological functions with the two basic attitudes, extroversion and introversion. The four psychological functions consist of two opponent pairs, as already dealt with by authors in the morning session. In the model presented by Brettner et al., one qubit is used to model psychological functions as a quaternity, assuming the correspondence that sensing is equal to sigma x and intuition is equal to minus sigma x, polyspin matrix sigma x. Thinking is equal to sigma z and feeling is equal to minus sigma z. Again, another polyspin matrix, which is represented here in another notation, that is sigma x is equal to ket 1 bra 0 plus ket 0 bra 1, and sigma z is equal to ket 0 bra 0 minus ket 1 bra 1. But the matrix representations have already been given earlier. This is primarily motivated by Jung's idea of discriminating 8 basic personality types in dependence of one of the 4 dominant psychological functions as superior function and one of the complementary pairs, either sensing or intuition, or thinking or feeling as secondary function. This has already been presented and therefore I need not talk about it. The compass diagram, where we have also provided for the outer side as extroversion and the inner side as the introversion. The second qubit is used for representing different attributes of a personality, such as extroversion versus introversion, and it is represented by extroversion as being equal to sigma z and introversion as being equal to minus sigma z, the same polyspin matrix z. And Brettner et al. Also give another state, which is the intermediate state with an equal superposition of pure extroversion and pure introversion, and call it mixed state or intermediate state, and that is given by the polyspin operator sigma x. For constructing the full Hilbert space of 4 dimensions, one may make use of the superposition of these independent 2 qubits through tensor product. Not only that, one might even go further, as suggested by the authors, and consider entanglement of these 2 states so that they become inseparable. And this is the kind of problem that we have already handled in the teleportation circuit, so that should pose no problem. So the reason why I'm giving this quantum model of mind is that I wish now to emphasize that this is, in fact, the area for the future work. 50 to 70 years of brain science has produced extremely good results. And there's now promise of extremely good results, even beyond the expectation of neuroscience in terms of mind science. And for that, quantum modeling of mind is essential. So the area that's going to be important in the future is psychology. Each scientific observer describes himself as to how he has acted and what he has learned. Also, in actual scientific practice, the experimenters are free to choose which experiments they perform. The empirical procedures are determined by the protocols and aims of the experimenters. Given the aforesaid scientific practice, emphasizing the elements of conscious freedom on the part of experimenting scientists as to how to act and what to learn from the experiments to be performed, and the recent success of brain science, neuroscience, as well as the growing realization in the last decade of the aptness and applicability of quantum theoretic modeling to cognitive domain of mind science, it follows as a natural corollary to suggest extension of the quantum theory to the domain of spiritual psychophysical dynamics. As yet, the dynamics which has been modeled is psychophysical, but now you add a spiritual dimension to it, spiritual psychophysical dynamics. It would require separating the spiritual self, not the mind self. As yet they had been separating the mind self. But now I go a step further and suggest or hypothesize that it would require separating the spiritual self or entity, which is, according to religion of saints, the true self, not the ego, not the superego, not the id. It is beyond that. It would require separating the spiritual self of the observers or experimenters, describing a stream of conscious experiences by the spirit that are the experiential sites of a sequence of events from the psychophysical sites of the observed system. Now, observer becomes the true self, the spirit, and observed system becomes the rest of the system, that is psychodynamical, psychophysical system, including not only the physical bodies and brains of all observers, but also their psychological minds as parts of the observed system, described by quantum theory. This is why it is relevant to try and model mind in quantum theoretic terms. It is the psychophysical sites of the observed system which actualize the neural correlates and cognitive correlates of those experiences of the spiritual self of the observers, not the mind self, not the ego, not the superego, respectively in the physical brains and psychological minds of the observers. So brain science continues to be important and will continue to flourish, but mind science is looming on the horizon and needs to be developed. It is expected that in due course of time, mind science, that is cognitive science, together with already advanced brain science, will develop so as to bring up the emotional empirical sides up to the level where the details of spirit, mind, brain interconnections will be actively probed. Through advancements in mind science via psychological tests, in the case of personality, we are aware of such tests as Myers-Briggs test indicator, MBTI, socionics schemes, and SLIP, Singer-Loomis personality inventory for personality, and many other tests. And intricate results will be explored that can be compared with the hypothesized spiritual psychophysical quantum theory. For example, omni-quantum theory of consciousness is sketched out in the rudimentary sense in the beginning of this presentation. Thank you for your patient hearing.